So at this time, I'd like to invite Patricia Brown to come to the podium and Michael LaRose. Patricia of JENGBA is the mother of 2 sons, both of whom have been imprisoned. And we're going to hear some about the story of how that came to be, having to do with the joint enterprise law. And Michael LaRose is of the George Padmore Institute. Welcome to both of you.
I should add that this is the 3rd part of our workshop demanding justice. We've heard about rape.
So they can't hear you.
Okay. Thank you. We have had the rape part and the criminalisation of poverty, and now this is racism and discrimination. Per se, all of it is racism, rape, discrimination, criminalisation of poverty. The whole conference is about that. There's nothing that is not that, but this is homing in on a particular aspect. Patricia.
Good afternoon, thanks for having me. I'm speaking as a mother who's been affected 5 years now. My son, my 15-year-old son was committed to life in prison into a cell from the age of 15 for a stab wound that he did not commit. My condolences goes to anybody who's been affected by, violence. But this is the other end of the spectrum, whereby people are being convicted for a crime they did not commit, and as a child. The media takes part in sort of demonising a lot of the youths as gangs, when in actual fact I can see in a lot of cases, GENGBA cases, and from my experience, that we're mainly looking at people who are related as family, friends and neighbours. But the new word is gangs and criminals, animals, wolves, thugs. And so it gets sensationalised by elitist journalists who can write big words in the press and confuse the masses about what is really going on. The youth prisons, what I have experience in visiting on a regular basis and seeing a lot of children like my son, whereby one person has committed the crime. Usually, it's quite saddening to know that somebody has lost their life. One stab wound, and you're having, 5 people, 10 children, 15. It goes on for one person's actions, called joint enterprise, and now so they're more using conspiracy, and it's really shocking to know that in this country such things are really happening. And from what I can see, the trials are not usually fair. In my case, my son, it was a racial case where the leader of the jury was a police sergeant. So I don't think we really stood much of a chance for children to be judged in such a way by the media, and then, police jury, led jury to, like I said, life in prison, which I'm still trying to get over it now, I'm an ordinary person, but it doesn't come across like that because of the kind of label that our family's been given, and it continues because I have another child who, through curiosity and innocence, went out during the August disturbance to see what was happening, and again he gets picked up, and because the label that has been given to us as a family and as a black group of people, you know, who, like I said, who are just ordinary, you know, people who are just trying to survive all the atrocities of what we're trying to cope with, you know, trying to free my son most of all. Then he gets convicted to, again, you know, heavy charges, plea bargaining to try to get out of a situation where we know by you're innocent but you're getting proven guilty. And that's the situation I'm in. And I'm like any other mother who have aspirations and dreams for my children. Didn't expect to live this kind of life. You know, I love my children. They give me a lot of joy and happiness, and that's been taken away from me. You know, it's been taken away from me. I've been separated from them. Again, all the other similarities of injustices that I've noticed that people talk about today, it has the same effect, you know, to those who are in the prisons. You get to a stage where your child is moved to another side of the country to get the visits. You know, I've been 3 years trying to visit him in Yorkshire. The cost, you know, is so much that, you know, a lot of the time you're going without food, trying to save for those visits, you know. When you get there, you realise that maybe you're not even going to get the hour that you expected. It's cut back to about half an hour, and you have to be grateful that you're actually getting to see your child, you know. And then turning from a child into a man, I'm aging as well, and it just doesn't really end. So right now he's about to be moved to adult prison. I don't know what to expect. I can just talk about the amount of innocent children. I used to think that everybody in the prison was guilty because you've been convicted. But when I see what has happened to my family, my children, and then meeting through GENGBA, which is a group, Joint Enterprise Not Guilty by Association, hearing the same stories, I realised, no, everybody just can't be lying like this, you know, it must be true, you know. So we formed a pressure group as well as a support group, and last year we managed to take it to the House of Commons and ask for an inquiry, and they have now written a report where they're saying that they're going to put in guidelines into the courts because they can actually see it's so blatant. I can't help thinking that, you know, how could you know 5 people with no evidence, you know, no real evidence, be charged with murder when in actual fact only one person, and they accept that. But they say it's a joint enterprise. You don't have to be there. You can just be on the end of the phone. You can come away from the scene. And my son wasn't there, and yet you're given a life sentence to the jail. You know, it can't be right.
Not right. Thank you.
In the discussion, we'll talk about what might be done, because we can't leave it at that. We never leave it at that. We at this centre follow things, as Nikki said, to the end, and the end has to be a happy ending.
Thank you, Patricia. At this time, I'd like to welcome Michael LaRose from the George Padmore Institute.
I just want to thank everybody here for our invitation, and also to thank for the very important presentation on GENGBA, because that's part of what I'm going to talk about. Demands, organisation, campaigns of the mass movement changes law.
Hear, hear.
Vigilance will stop the law against the mass movement coming from different sides. And GENGBA's work around this question of joint venture it'd be very important that we know about it and support it. The GPI is an archive of the struggle of people of African, Caribbean, and Asian descent in Britain. And it's partly to record our struggles, but also to inform the next generations of what we could do or what we can achieve, our victories and losses to go forward. There has been a long history of radical movement here in Britain. The Chartists is one of them. But when the mass movement received immigrants from the Caribbean, West Africa and Asia in the 1950s, it energized and dynamized this question of struggle here in Britain. Because for a long time, the people at the bottom of this society were facing problems which we're still facing today. But we did not come alive in Britain, as my father, John LaRose, was always happy to say. We come from histories from the past, from the Caribbean, anti-colonial struggle, independence struggle, post-independence struggles. And we have to link up and use those experiences wherever we have that experience in the world. In 1958, here in Britain was the Notting Hill race riots in Nottingham and Notting Hill, and led to a unification of the Caribbean population here against racism, raw racism in the street and from the police. One of the leaders of that movement was Claudia Jones, and her founding of two important movements here. One was the Carnival movement, or the Caribbean Carnival movement, and secondly, the anti-racist movement that a lot of us are part of. In the 1970s, it was the Mangrove 9 trial, where Ian is going to talk about later, and Althea LeConte Jones, where is she? Althea was the leader of the Black Panther movement here in London, and a person called Barbara Beese was also part of that Mangrove 9 leadership, showed us how to defeat the British police and the courts here in Britain. Part of what we do is we've been showing the Mangrove 9 film around London and different parts of the country to bring that history to life, because it's really needed now. In '76, we had the Grunwick strike and the success of Asian leadership under Jayaben Desai, and new laws to stop mass picket and flying pickets. So what I'm saying is that at every turn, when you are successful, you must expect the law to change, and then you must expect to resist that law. In the 1970s and 80s, the BPM and BYM, using the blueprint of the Mangrove 9, fought many campaigns and cases against the police and the state. And later on, there were all the cases of deaths in custody, led by mothers, sisters, and aunts and nieces, especially. I'm thinking of Janet Alder. I'm thinking of the Roger Sylvester campaign, which I'm quite close to. This forced the state into new laws to record police action, like PACE interviews. This is the taped interviews that they have in police stations, and even talking now about having cameras in the back of police vans. But essentially, the nature of our interaction with the police doesn't change. We have to bring them under control, because they will always try and control us with laws and actions. Finally, there have been the recent movements of both Uncut, Occupy, the November 30th March, the Students' March. We've seen the use of kettling of young people. And after the death of Mark Duggan in Tottenham, we had the reprisal of using the courts as to punish people, and this question of joint venture, and especially the question of Section 60 of Criminal Justice Act, which is stop and search. If you talk to anybody around who was involved in those insurrections, they'll tell you stop and search and police corruption and police racism is still top of the agenda.
Yes.
We must be vigilant. Oh, sorry, there's one more thing I want to tell you. Also, the Occupy movement has really challenged the state and has given us fantastic ideas. There's a new law that if you come to the Olympics, you can't come with a tent. So just want to know that. Finally, I said we must be vigilant and stand up against Section 60 stop and search and this question of joint enterprise that GENGBA was teasing about. And I hope we can do some work about it later, but I also hope that you will support those campaigns as they come up. The mass movement or people organize can weaken the tools of oppression, and we've got to be always aware of that. Thank you.